Hello, Legend of the Samurai here with the Medeco M4. This is their patent extension that's superseding the M3, and it has a couple of notable upgrades from there, particularly how the key is constructed and how the sidebar operates. So this, instead of a single slider that the M3 had, it has 4 side pins that interact with that sidebar and prevent it from falling in completely. And it also has a little interactive on the key, which makes the keys much harder to duplicate. Alright, so first we'll pick this open, and then I will discuss a little bit in more detail about what is in this particular lock and why. So, key does work, and be just tensioning clockwise and make sure everything's nice and scrambled. So this lock, when being picked clockwise, actually mixes shear and sidebar feedback at the very beginning without having to do anything with the side pins. So if I go in, I can actually feel a little bit of drag from the sidebar pins if I have tension on the lock. So if I feel that drag, I can let off tension, rotate the pin, reapply tension, and see if I've gotten it there. But this does not differentiate true from false gates. So I may have to come back later and fix things. Alright, I think I have the feedback mostly where I want it, so I will start lifting. Okay, and I've got a decent amount of false set, so I think I have my rotations good, but I could still be in false gates. So I'm going to switch to a little hook that's better suited to lifting, and I'll go for shear. Okay, and based on that false set, I think I'm set everywhere, so I will switch to a little side pin pick. And 4 is binding, 3 is locked up, so 3 has a false gate. I have to lighten up ever so slightly, and then I can sneak past it. 1 is good, 2 is good, and we are open. And this, apart from the drivers dropping in, can go full circle. Alright, so now we'll take this apart and show what is in here. I will also show what was originally in here, because the pinning I received this lock with was not quite up to what I would have expected. So first, unload from the top. So from the front, there is a barrel driver. I will attempt to get these arranged properly. And here, show this is in the right orientation. That's the next one, sorry. Here I have a little mushroom driver. Keypin in 4 likes to get stuck. All right, so set that there for a moment and go close on these briefly. So we have barrel drivers in 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6, a mushroom in 3, and then all of the key pins I have in here have false gates. I'll show those closer in a little bit. And then one of them is also spooled at the top. So that's what I have installed in here. Take out the sidebar and show those elements. And these, similar to other Medecos, the anti-drill inserts will actually keep you from pulling the plug out. Knock those out of there. So one of those sits in front of the sidebar groove, so you have to have the plug turned in order to remove that. Here's our housing. There's our sidebar groove. Other than that, it's pretty normal. Now, here's our plug. Get this sidebar out of here. Sometimes it wants to get stuck. And keep track of those little springs. Unlike previous generations of sidebars that had holes specifically for the springs, these ones are just sort of sitting in a little pocket, and there is also a little pocket there, so nothing quite retains them. Here is our sidebar. So we have 4 sections, and each section has a bit of a fence, and that is checking against those true gates that are lined up on those sliders. And we can see we have 1, 2, 3 sliders here that do not have useful false gates from a picking perspective, and one of them that does, and it's shallow enough that it didn't engage very strongly. These other ones have false gates in 1 and 4. The interactive pin does not. So show the bottom of the plug here. So we have the 4 sliders again. And how this interactive works, well, first let me take the sliders out. They're all individually sprung. All right, so how this interactive works is we have this little button on the key that can be pushed up. And so there is a little ramp right here, and as the key moves past that, it pushes that little bump up into the open space, and then that acts as a bitting surface that will lift the slider in that position, and that can be put in multiple different positions, so that differs further. The sliders themselves. So here is one of them. So we have a deep true gate and a little bit of a false gate, and then this little bit is what interacts with the key. So I have 2 of that bitting depth and 1 of the higher cut, and that has a false gate that appears above the true gate. Same little protrusion there. There is a 3rd bitting height here that also has a false gate, but my lock does not have one. But that's just due to bitting. And then the interactive here, it does not have a false gate, just has the 1 true gate, but then it has these steps milled out. And so the keyway ends right flush with this surface, and that little button gets pushed into this cutout, which then lifts the pin. I will show my pins and drivers. So these are older biaxial pins that I simply have a supply of. So we have 1 deep true gate and 1 false gate. Show that for all of them. This one has true gate, false gate, and some spooling at the top. True gate, false gate. True gate, false gate. And finally, true gate, false gate. Now these drivers, so these are the Medeco version of the Assa-style barrel drivers, and they come in a number of different heights. And then the other 2 are identical, and those interact with countermilling. And this is the same style as the Assa barrel countermilling. There are 2 sharp cuts. And so if you start with the barrel under both of them, you have 3 distinct clicks as you go up to set. They do not mill chamber number 3, and that is why I have one of their normal mushroom drivers in number 3. I can show that these do in fact click into that milling pretty nicely. Not quite as nicely as you would expect in, say, one of the newer Assa twins, but it's still functional. As I received this cylinder, so I purchased this brand new, and as I was wiping off some of the extra oil after disassembling it, this plating just completely wiped off with a soft cloth. So I think that is likely just a defect. I don't know that it is widespread, but it happened to this one. Now, I will show the pins that this was delivered with. So these are key pins without any false gates anywhere. Some of them do have the milling, which does not extend the true gate to the bottom instead of the broaching found on other pins, and that will prevent wire decoder attacks. Some of them are still broached all the way through, and most of these have this spooling up at the top, but it's down quite a ways from the shear line, so you actually have to overlift one pretty significantly to get caught up in that. I have a feeling it might be more related to foiling a different kind of wire decoding attack, because that height is not entirely consistent. So these are both a number 5 cut, but this one has a wider top than this one. The thing that I was hoping for was more of the barrel drivers. I only got 1. Every other pin in here is standard. And not only are they standard, apparently there is a new style of standard key pin. So go close on that. That is a very significant bevel. And so I have an older biaxial standard driver right here, and they are very lightly domed, and they do not have that massive bevel. And this has a couple of effects. So these are the same size driver. One is that this one, because of that bevel, it allows you to hold looser tolerances on your key cutting. It allows for more wear in a lock. It can make the key smoother to operate as the key and the pins wear down, but it also widens the shear line, which does make them easier to pick. For instance, this bevel is wide enough that a number 6 cut key pin, I believe I can show that here because I have a 6 cut. So that sits right about there, and if you put a barrel over top of it, you actually do have to lift that pin in order to set that barrel. If you put one of these beveled drivers over top of it, the bevel is just clear of the edge of the chamber, which means you don't have to touch that pin ever. It will just set itself if you apply torque to the plug. Now, I don't know if that's intentional, but this lock was pinned out of an M4 kit, or so I am told. So I'm assuming that is a general change to the drivers. I can show these a little bit more. So one thing I noticed about this spooling here, there is another style of security key pin. So this is an older biaxial pin. They call this a ringed pin. So this, in addition to having a true and a false gate, it has 2, if I can show that, rings milled into the lower portion of the pin. And what those do is, as the sidebar fingers come in, these can, as you're lifting, drag past and give you very, very strange feedback. So it makes picking significantly more difficult if you have these installed. But these are all at the tops of the pins, and on a number 3 cut, they do just barely sit inside that sidebar window, but all of the higher cuts, it sits completely above that window, so it does not give you that kind of feedback. So there are the original pins. This lock is significantly easier to pick as it was pinned. I have no idea if this was the intent. I assume Medeco has pinning specifications that they do in factory, and whether or not a locksmith follows that is up to the locksmith, so I have no idea whether or not this would qualify as an acceptable bitting, but this is what I received. And in order to give this lock as good a chance as possible, I put in my own pins to take advantage of all of the security features that it has to offer. The sidebar itself, it's interesting, it's cleverly done. This particular lock isn't the best example to showcase how difficult it could be, because 2 of these, I only have to nudge them. The 3rd one has no false gate, and the 4th one has a false gate that doesn't grab super hard, but I have heard from other folks that the sidebar can be very, very tricky to get past, especially depending on where it binds. The thing that really makes these locks difficult is the countermilling coupled with the barrels, although that isn't actually a new feature. This here is a biaxial plug. So this is an older lock. Note that it does not have the cutout, so this is an M3 plug, which has the cutout for that slider. This one does not have milling, but the biaxial does. And so I don't know exactly when this core was manufactured, but they were doing milling, and I have found barrel drivers in biaxial locks, and I know the newer M3s all had that same milling. So I don't know exactly when it was introduced, but that's not a new feature. Hopefully it persists and is included in all of the M4s, and hopefully they put as many barrel drivers as possible in there, because that's really what gives these a lot of pick resistance. The other thing that gives them very nice pick resistance is false gates on the pins, and as not a single one of the pins that I received has a false gate, I did not feel that it was a fair demonstration of this lock to pick it with these installed, because it is much simpler. I will also note that I picked it in the more difficult direction for this lock, so picking clockwise, I end up with sidebar and shear feedback at the same time, and if I end up in the false set from the barrels and the mushrooms, and I'm stuck in a false gate, it is not feasible to rotate out of that. You have to drop everything back and re-rotate in order to get through that. So, you know, this lock in this direction is quite difficult to pick. In the opposite direction, everything isolates very cleanly. So I would pick 2 pins to get to a little bit of a false set, and then I got perfect sidebar feedback, set all of those rotations, then the side pins would start binding, set all of those, get a deeper false set, and then go to shear on the barrels without having to worry about interacting with anything. So it's just a simpler pick in that direction. So this was the hardest I could make this lock with what pins I had on hand. They certainly can be extremely difficult. It very much depends on when all of the elements bind in relation to each other. If these side pins had started binding during all of the shear feedback, that could make things much, much more difficult, because if I have to keep dropping things to go set these and then reset these, it could ping-pong back and forth and be a nightmare. Alright, so I believe that is all I have to say about the M4. It's certainly an interesting lock. I look forward to seeing more people pick them as they become available. There's our original pins. And once again, here is our key with that little interactive. I think it is an upgrade over the M3, but I think, at least for this lock, the things that made it harder could also have been installed in current M3s. So definitely a step in the right direction, and it will be interesting to see what stock pinnings actually look like from the factory and what's included in the M4 pinning kits. Alright, thank you for watching, and have a nice day.